Chicago, mid-1990s. The city breathes smoke and steel, and somewhere beneath its skyline, a shadow moved faceless, ruthless, and untraceable. They called him a ghost. But ghosts don't hold semi-automatics with the discipline of a seasoned agent. Ghosts don't vanish through alleyways without leaving so much as a fingerprint or fiber behind. And this one? He struck like a storm and disappeared like a whisper, silent, cold, and without mercy. At first, it seemed like just another bank job. Nothing unusual for a metropolis teetering between order and chaos. But by the time the second heist rolled around, lawmen started to murmur. By the third, they were wide awake. This wasn't a desperate man with a ski mask and a grudge. No, this was an operator. A tactician. A professional. March 5, 199X. South side of Chicago. A modest branch bank, the kind where names are still remembered and the morning coffee is poured before the vaults open. The staff arrived, unaware that within an hour, they'd come face to face with a man who'd rehearsed this moment like a stage actor waiting for his cue. At 10 o'clock sharp, the calm broke. Empty the drawers. Keep your hands off the alarm, he barked, voice flat, clipped, practiced. Not loud, not wild, but commanding, like a drill sergeant in a robbery rehearsal. The employees didn't argue. They complied, paralyzed not by confusion, but by clarity. They understood this man wasn't bluffing. Within moments, he was gone. No getaway tires squealing into the distance, no trail of chaos in his wake. Just silence, and a room full of stunned witnesses. When the first squad rolled in, lights cutting through the city haze, they were met not with clues, but with absence. The man was already dust in the wind. The witness descriptions were vague. Tall, roughly 5 feet 11 inches, light-skinned, but beyond that, he was smoke. The mask, the gloves, the precision, everything about him said he'd done this before. More than once. One detail stuck in the minds of the feds, though. One that changed everything. He had a police radio, whispered a trembling teller. He knew what they were saying. He was listening, to all of it. That was the first sign, the first crack in the illusion. He wasn't just armed, he was trained. And that meant the game had just changed. The Chicago police ran their standard grid, they canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, rattled doorknobs, and prayed for something useful. And they got just that. A local woman, sharp-eyed, cautious, remembered a man with a false beard climbing into a drab 4-door sedan. Couldn't make out the plate. But it was enough. Officers fanned out, boots pounding pavement. Minutes later, the vehicle was located. It was parked a few blocks from the bank, abandoned like a stage prop no longer needed. The ignition? Covered with a crumpled paper towel. No prints. No fibers. Not even a smudge of oil. The car had been reported stolen, lifted from a shopping center just 4 days earlier. The same quiet, calculated method. The same echo of intent. That's when local authorities handed the baton to the bureau. Because when you rob a bank in America, you don't just poke the city bare. You summon the FBI. And when the bureau steps into a case like this, they don't just investigate. They hunt. A task force began to form, lean and focused. The bureau wasn't chasing a criminal, they were tracking a predator with law enforcement instincts and military-grade discipline. This wasn't just a man robbing banks. This was someone who'd been trained to protect them. The first robbery had been clean, too clean. But it was what came next that chilled the air around the bureau's war room. Weeks passed, and then another bank, this time in Libertyville, a sleepy suburb with wide lawns and a low crime rate, found itself under siege. The masked man returned, colder now, more deliberate. This time, he didn't settle for the registers. He wanted the vault. Open it, he growled, the weapon in his hand a silent promise. His stance, tight, balanced, deliberate, wasn't just familiar to the agents watching surveillance footage later. It was textbook. Not the way a street thug holds a gun. The way a cop does. The tellers hesitated, and he didn't like that. No games. No buttons. I hear what they hear, he hissed, gesturing to the police scanner pressed to his ear. You press a silent alarm, I'll know before you do. And they believed him. He vanished again, vanishing into the rhythm of the city like smoke in a subway tunnel. But this time, he made a mistake, or at least, fate blinked. One of the bank clerks caught a glimpse of the license plate as he made his exit. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Libertyville PD jumped on it like hounds scenting blood. The vehicle turned up fast, dumped on a side street like a used shell casing. Same method. Stolen days before. Plucked from a shopping center, same as before. And just like in Chicago, the ignition had been concealed, but this time, not with a paper towel. This time, it was a folded cloth, precisely placed. To the untrained eye, it meant nothing. But to Special Agent Hank Schmidt, a grizzled FBI veteran with 30 years in the Bureau's trenches, it meant everything. The way he holds that weapon, Schmidt murmured over the grainy footage, isn't random. That's training. That's discipline. That's not a criminal, that's one of us. With that realization, the temperature in the room dropped. They weren't chasing a junkie or an amateur with a taste for danger. They were hunting a former professional, someone who had once worn the badge, and now used its secrets against the very institutions he'd sworn to serve. The Bureau recalibrated. Every agent on the task force felt it, the urgency, the shift. They weren't just investigating robberies anymore. They were unraveling a code. And whoever this man was, he wasn't improvising. He had a playbook, one written in silence and speed, and sharpened by years of watching the system from the inside. He never hit the same jurisdiction twice. Never crossed the same line. Every robbery? A different town, a different precinct, a different watch commander. He was dividing the map, making sure no single department could connect the dots in time. But the FBI? The FBI seized the full board. And for the first time, they were beginning to understand the shape of the monster that haunted their case files. As the months dragged on, the Bureau worked in silence, long nights, cold coffee, and endless paperwork strewn with dead ends. But something kept pulling them forward. The pattern. He struck with precision. Always a shopping center, always during a long employee shift, always a mid-sized sedan, forgettable, invisible, practical. He'd lift the car before dawn, use it for the heist, and dump it blocks away. By the time the rightful owner realized it was missing, the robber was already a memory. A phantom in a fake beard. Desperate for a lead, the Bureau turned to an unconventional method, canvassing costume shops across the greater Chicago area. They showed photos, asked the right questions, tried to shake loose a memory. Nothing. Clerks shook their heads, shrugged. We get dozens of guys buying this stuff, they'd say. Could be anyone. And in truth, it could. Because this man? He didn't just disguise his face. He erased it. Still, the robberies continued. Between January 1990 and February 1991, 7 banks fell under his shadow. 7 times he walked in, made demands, and walked out without a trace. Then, without a word, he disappeared. For 9 long months, the city held its breath. Had he fled the state? Was he dead, arrested on some unrelated charge? Had he simply stopped? The agents didn't know. But what haunted them most wasn't his silence, it was the possibility that he was still out there, waiting. And then, in November of 1991, he came back, and this time, the game turned lethal. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. Officer Kevin Marr, a seasoned beat cop from Palatine, was breaking in a new recruit. Just another training ride, just another dusty afternoon. They spotted a car with expired tags heading down Quinton Road, and Marr decided it was the perfect moment for a teaching opportunity. Let's light him up, he said casually. I'll show you how to handle a clean stop. But the stop was anything but clean. Before Marr could even unbuckle his seatbelt, the suspect's door swung open. A firearm flashed in the sun. Then came the gunshot. Glass exploded inward. Metal tore through flesh. Marr was hit the shoulder, the face shards lacerating skin, blood mixing with sirens. He's got a weapon, the rookie screamed, barely processing what he saw. Marr didn't hesitate. Wounded, disoriented, he clawed at his radio, his voice cracking with urgency. "Officer down. Shots fired. I've been hit." The call ignited the network. Departments from across the region responded, lights flashing, tires screeching, air units called in. Helicopters cut across the overcast skies. The manhunt began in full. But the shooter? He vanished again, leaving nothing but a smoking gun and a wounded officer behind. Investigators combed the scene, desperate for a clue. And when they found the vehicle abandoned, stolen, ignition masked with a cloth, the realization hit them like a cold wind. He was back. The same method. The same precision. The same surgical cleanliness. This wasn't a random act of road rage. This was the Bearded Bandit, and now he wasn't just robbing banks, he was willing to gun down officers in daylight. The Bureau knew what that meant. The stakes had changed. Now, it wasn't just about robbery. Now it was war. The shooting of Officer Marr was more than a violent flare-up, it was a declaration. A turning point. The man they were chasing had crossed a sacred line, and in doing so, summoned the full weight of federal justice. The FBI wasn't just involved now, it was committed. A multi-jurisdictional task force emerged from the smoke. Agents from the Bureau teamed with state troopers, city detectives, and suburban lawmen, all bound by one singular objective. Bring him down. But this wasn't an ordinary fugitive. He studied their movements, predicted their strategies, listened to their dispatches as if he had written them himself. And in many ways, he had. He understood the system because he had once been part of it. Now, he was turning that knowledge against the very badge he once wore. So the FBI changed tactics. No more waiting for mistakes. No more reaction. They would anticipate his next move, force his hand, control the tempo. And to do that, they had to dig deeper into his method, cold, clinical, repeatable. It always began with a vehicle. Always stolen. Always from a shopping center. Always taken at the start of a shift, when the owner wouldn't notice until long after the crime was done. If they could intercept the car before he used it, just once, they might catch him red-handed. So, the Bureau watched. Agents monitored vehicle thefts across Chicagoland, narrowing their focus to unremarkable sedans, lifted from shopping lots, tied to employee shifts. For weeks, they waited in silence. Then, in December 1991, their patience paid off. A patrol officer in Niles, Illinois, flagged a car parked oddly in a residential zone. A quick check confirmed it, stolen from a nearby shopping plaza. Every detail aligned with the bandits' playbook. They didn't move on it. Not yet. Instead, the Bureau set the trap. They rigged the car with a hidden tracking device, precise, undetectable, and installed a remote engine kill switch under the dash. If he used the vehicle, they'd know exactly where he was. And when the time came, they'd stop him cold. But they didn't stop there. A few days later, in Rolling Meadows, another vehicle appeared, same profile, same quiet theft. The Bureau moved fast, repeating the setup. Now, they had two baited vehicles, lying in wait like silent sentinels. Then came December 13th, a gray morning cloaked in tension. A man approached the first vehicle. From the shadows, agents held their breath. Was it him? The silhouette matched. The walk, casual, but with purpose. He slid into the driver's seat. The bandit had taken the bait. Special Agent Hank Schmidt, watching from a surveillance point, gave the nod. That's him. The car pulled away. Agents followed at a distance, silent, measured, invisible. Another vehicle tailed just behind, a second man, in a van. Two suspects. Not one. They didn't panic. They followed. Every second broadcast to the team in real time. The Bureau's silent orchestra was in motion. The first suspect parked near a bank. A pattern emerging. This was the setup, the prelude to another heist. But this time, it wouldn't happen. This time, the Bureau wouldn't wait for a vault to open or for customers to hit the floor. They'd stopped the show before the curtain even rose. The second vehicle, the backup getaway, was his next move. He entered the second stolen car. And that's when the Bureau made the call. The moment the second car started rolling, the agents moved. A quiet command crackled through the Bureau's comms. "Shut it down." Within seconds, the engine coughed and died, strangled mid-motion by the remote kill switch. Inside the car, the suspect froze. He knew something was wrong. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was a snare, and he was caught in the jaws. Then, the takedown. Agents emerged like phantoms from alleyways and storefronts, weapons drawn but steady. Every move was deliberate. They'd rehearsed this moment, calculated it down to the last breath. FBI. Hands where we can see them. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. A flicker of calculation in his eyes. Was he reaching? Was he thinking of drawing? The tension coiled like wire. Then, he surrendered. Cuffed and subdued, the man was pulled from the car. His bag was examined, and what lay inside confirmed what the Bureau already knew. A loaded handgun. A police scanner, tuned and active. A kit of disguises: gloves, false beards, adhesive mustaches. This wasn't just a robber. This was a chameleon, trained to vanish, built to deceive. At the precinct, the suspect's ID was run through the system. The name that came back struck the task force like a thunderclap. Jeffrey Erickson. And it all made sense. Years earlier, Erickson had worn a uniform, a patrol officer in a suburban Chicago department. His service record told a familiar story: exceptional marksmanship, quiet demeanor, a lack of enthusiasm for the job's demands. Eventually, he resigned just ahead of disciplinary action that would have forced him out. Somewhere along the line, he'd made a choice. To stop enforcing the law. And start weaponizing it. The Bureau now had their man. But the case wasn't over. Because Jeffrey Erickson hadn't worked alone. With Jeffrey Erickson in custody, the Bureau turned its gaze toward the one remaining variable, his wife, Jill. She hadn't been a shadow on the case until now, but investigators quickly uncovered a chilling truth: she was no bystander. Jill wasn't just the woman beside the man, she was his partner, embedded in the blueprint of his crimes. The FBI moved fast, dispatching agents to monitor her home, hoping to intercept her before she could vanish. But Jill had plans of her own. As agents closed in, she slipped out the back, climbed into a vehicle, and tore down the road, driving not with panic, but precision. What followed was nothing short of a cinematic chase across state lines, Jill weaving through traffic, exchanging gunfire with pursuing officers, a wild ballet of desperation and defiance. She fought with the same resolve her husband had shown. But her war ended differently. After agents disabled her vehicle, Jill, cornered and surrounded, made one final choice. Before officers could reach her, she turned the weapon on herself. The screen went black. The Bureau's agents stood still for a moment, not in triumph, but in silence. The storm had passed, but the wreckage it left behind would linger for years. Still, the case file wouldn't close just yet. Because Jeffrey Erickson, even behind bars, had one final performance left in him. Months later, in 1992, during a court appearance, he did the unthinkable. While being escorted by U.S. Marshals, Erickson managed to free himself from his restraints. How, no one could say. But what followed was brutal and swift. He overpowered a marshal, stole his sidearm, and fired. One man fell. Erickson made for the exit, a desperate sprint through the courthouse halls, chaos blooming in every direction. And then, a second shot, this time from a lawman's weapon. Jeffrey Erickson collapsed. Dead before he hit the floor. The final curtain had fallen. His reign, a string of bank robberies that danced through jurisdictions, a campaign of fear that blurred the line between cop and criminal, ended not in a courtroom, but in a gunshot echoing through marble walls. The case was closed. But it wasn't just about robberies, or even about violence. This was about a man who took the tools of justice and twisted them. A man who knew the system, and believed he could outsmart it. He nearly did. But in the end, it was the FBI, patient, methodical, relentless, that brought him down. No badge is above the law. And no disguise is perfect.